Thank you so much for having me here today, and Suzanne, thanks for the great talk. As I was really thinking about what I wanted to talk about today, this issue of complexity for me kept kind of burning into my brain. And I've been thinking a lot about it in my work at Twitter and as my work as a designer. And I don't want to give you guys kind of a list of like, these are the five ways to deal with complexity in your organization. I don't claim to know anything about what you guys do, but what I do want to do is talk about complexity in a way that is really meaningful to me and tell you guys some stories about how I have kind of managed that and thought about that in my own work as a designer. And I think I need to just start with talking about the things about design that I know. And I know essentially two things about design. The first thing I know is that design is really hard because design is based on this technical foundation of code. And that includes all manner of messy hairballs of problems. It is based on systems that are predictable, that are rigorous, that are precise, they're measured. And this really is what makes our experiences work. It is the nuts and bolts of how we put experiences together. But the second thing I know about design is that design is about people. And you take that crazy complexity of code and you put it into the hands of people, and all of a sudden the experience that you build has become delightful and meaningful and connected and really powerful. And I think of this as how an experience feels. And to me, this side of the screen is what matters. But this side of the screen is what I do on a day-to-day basis. And I think that, how an experience feels, is what matters because nobody comes to our products and says, I love this because it's so hard. Nobody shows up at Twitter and says, I love what you make because I don't understand it. People come to our products and enjoy our products because they connect them with environments and people that they didn't have access to or connection before. People love Twitter not because it's sometimes hard to understand, but because it brings them into a connection with communities that they didn't know before. People love Twitter because it gives them a voice and the ability to express themselves to a large group of people. People love what they do because it makes them feel like they are part of something that is bigger than themselves. And that's really important. But every day, we as designers wake up to a huge problem, because the problem that we have is that we actually sit smack in the middle of these two things. And every day, we have to come up with better and better ways to bridge the gap between really technical things and really squishy human experiences. And that process is really complex. So the question that I have been asking myself very frequently recently is, how do we bridge this gap? How do we as designers in this room, as product people, as entrepreneurs, as engineers, how do we bridge the gap between how something works and how something feels? The way that I think about this is actually not through technology or product design at all. And the way I want to talk to you guys about that today is through my experience with athletics. Before I was a product designer, I was an athlete and a coach. I started rowing when I was 14 years old. This is my high school crew. I think I was maybe 15 in this picture. And I was immediately addicted. I rowed in high school, I rowed every day in college. I started coaching nationally competitive crews when I was just 21 years old. And it was an experience that made me feel something so powerful, and I loved it. I loved rowing because it was meaningful to me. It made me feel like I was connected to a community. It made me just feel bigger than myself. And so I want to talk to you today about how rowing helped me understand complex systems, because for me, rowing and coaching was this daily proof that the technical things that we build are inextricably linked to how someone feels about that experience. And so I think designing for complexity for me means paying attention to three things. The first thing is we have to pay attention to those technical environments that we build. We have to give people really easy ways to execute a series of actions very gracefully, just using our technical kind of capabilities. The second thing is we have to pay attention to human experience. We don't always understand it, we don't always get it, but it is what matters. And that means we have to understand people's behaviors, we have to understand their goals and what motivates them. And then finally, we have to build that connection. Because design and building that connection really means giving people the right ways to enable and equip their actions rather than to slow them down. So let me talk first about technical environments. As designers and technologists, we work in technical environments every day. These are our apps, these are our websites, these are our kind of mobile spaces, whether it's a profile or a home timeline feed, something like that. Everybody has a technical environment that they work in. And we always optimize those environments, right? We move the dials and levers and optimize them for the complexity that we feel. But as a coach, my space wasn't digital at all, but it was very physical. And this is what that environment looks like. This is an 8-man rowing shell. We just call them boats. And what you have to remember in rowing is that a boat is not just a thing, but a boat is an entire environment made up of thousands, literally thousands of moving pieces. Boats are just longer than the length of tractor trailers, but they're no more than 20 inches wide and 1/4 of an inch thick. They're made up of carbon fiber and honeycomb, and they're directed down 1 to 3 mile race courses simply through human force, willpower, and a rudder that is no bigger than the size of a credit card. Each piece of this environment can be configured or rigged to maximize or amplify the strengths of whatever crew is sitting in it. And some of these adjustments are very small, but some are very large and require complete refactoring of the team stroke mechanic. But what this means, the complexity of this technical environment means that based on the physics of the equipment and the weight distribution of the crew, a 2-inch variance in one person's hand height affects the balance of the entire machine. Yet, despite this small margin of error, it is a sport that relies on the calculated coordination of every major muscle group in the human body. And in this environment, coaches have to know how to optimize each piece perfectly, exactly, correctly at each part of the stroke. And they need to learn how to amplify certain movements at certain times, depending on whether they want to amplify speed, power, or technical proficiency. And what you have to remember is it's not just about doing that for one person, but doing that for 8 people, all at the same time. And it's this calculated coordination that gets 2,000 pounds of human bone, muscle, and flesh and a 20-inch wide tractor trailer down a race course. And I think the author Daniel James Brown, who wrote Boys in the Boat, says it really well when he talks about the technical complexity of rowing. He said, "It was maddeningly difficult, as if 8 men standing on a floating log that threatened to roll over whenever they moved had to hit 8 golf balls at exactly the same moment with exactly the same amount of force, directing the ball to exactly the same point on a green and doing so over and over and over again every 2 to 3 seconds. Rowing is incredibly complex. And you're sitting here going, why are you telling me this? And I think, if anything, what rowing and coaching taught me about design is that we have to intimately know the complexity of our digital and physical environments if we want to get anything to work. Much like my athletes, your users are standing on a log, trying to balance in your app, trying to figure out what the hell is going on. And each action that they take is an opportunity for you to amplify or break their experience. And you have to understand all the moving parts of those experiences, and don't underestimate the amount of effort it takes to get somebody to do something. Downloading your app, pressing a button, getting a rower to change her hand height 2 inches is a really complex process. And one mistake will stop you dead in the water. And so what I want to ask us today is the question is, how are we optimizing our technical environment so people can actually take action? Are we giving them the right spaces to do that? The second thing that I want to talk about is human experience. Without a doubt, these things are not related to each other. And so people would often ask me as a rower, why do you do this? Why do you get up at 5 a.m. every day? Why do you take all of your spring breaks and all of your holidays to go out and do something that is so technically hard? And I will tell you, just as I will hear from any other rower, is that what gets us up in the morning is not that it's hard, but because how this experience makes us feel. You ask any rower and they will look at you with sparkly tears in their eye and tell you that rowing connects them to an experience that is bigger than themselves. Because when you sit on the water and you sit in that boat, you're part of something that's alive, that has a life and a breath and a spirit all of its own. And rowing and the boat is not just a technical conglomeration of pieces, but it is a trust and a belief that you have to work together with 7 other people and do something that none of you could have done on your own. And I think much like our social software, this feeling is bigger than the technicalities that make it efficient. And so as designers, we are responsible for taking care of that. And we are responsible for creating the conditions that make that experience addictive. Because what we make is bigger than glass and pixels. It's bigger than ones and zeros. It's bigger than honeycomb and carbon fiber. What we make is a connection with a community. And how people feel when they show up to your product is a big deal. Do they feel successful? Do they feel connected? Do people feel confident that they can find what they're looking for? Or are they just overwhelmed, disoriented, and confused? Because I'll give you a tip. If people don't feel something when they come to practice every day, or if they don't feel something when they show up in your app, you've done nothing more than create a lifeless thing made out of ones and zeros. And that thing can't provide delight unless it finds connection. Which brings me to my third point. Because in order to show connection, we have to bridge that gap between the technical processes that we create on a daily basis and the meaningful experiences that somebody feels. And I want to talk to you about how I know these things are inextricably linked, and I hope you'll keep bearing with me with my rowing stories, but in rowing we have something that we call swing. And swing is a feeling. It is the most visceral thing that you can feel as part of a crew team. And this feeling is the direct result of a perfectly, flawlessly executed mechanical stroke by all 8 people. It is when the work of taking a stroke becomes so effortless that it turns a technically complex experience into something very delightful. And here's how that happens. Swing is achieved when all 16 legs, all 16 arms, all 8 backs, and all 80 toes and fingers prepare and move exactly and precisely at the same time and put the blades in the water crisply and intentionally. And what happens is the blades connect with such unison at the same rate, the same speed, and the same power that instead of pushing the boat through the water one at a time, the crew actually uses the combined leverage of their oars to pick up the boat, lift it, and propel it across the surface. And we say when crews find their swing, the effort suddenly feels effortless. And when the connection is good, work is easy. George Pocock says, when you get the rhythm of an 8, it is pure pleasure to be in it. It's not hard work when that rhythm comes. The swing, as they call it. I've heard men shriek out with delight. It's a thing they'll never forget as long as they live. And I think this comes back to this idea of how do we bridge the gap? How do we replicate the complexity of a feeling? Because because you give someone a way to upload their credit card information doesn't mean they feel safe doing it. Just because you give them a way to stand on that log and tell them what to do doesn't mean they're going to feel confident to do it. And so I want to just share with you quickly a model that I used in coaching every day and that I continue to use at Twitter that helps me to kind of bridge this gap. And it starts by asking a series of 4 questions. And it's simply, in order for somebody to feel something, what do we need to build? How do we build it? And then what are the things we can do? So I just want to walk through this quickly because, again, to me, this bridges that gap of how something works and how something feels. So I think first you have to identify, how do you want people to feel? What do you want people to do when they come to your product environment? If you want them to feel successful, you must build an experience that maybe shows them how to do something or reduces their anxiety. And this list here is not about features. This is about characteristics and qualities of the experience you want to build. And once you answer this question, how do you want to make people feel? Then you move into your features. These are the environments that you create that help people to execute. So if you want people to feel successful, you may maybe show people how to get around, and in order to do that, you need to improve your navigation. And then the last thing you ask is, what are the very technical things that we need to do to achieve that? Maybe it's that actually you need to rewrite your whole back-end system, which would suck, but that's the technical thing you need to do to make somebody feel confident. You need to answer this for your own organization, but this is something I use all the time, and it reminds me that design is more than a feeling, and design is really complex. And we have to build those environments. So I'm just going to close with this quote from George Pocock. I mentioned him earlier, and what I didn't mention is that he was a designer. He was a master boat builder, one of the best the sport has ever known. And more than anyone else of his time, he worked hard to create things where crews could feel successful. And I think we really have something to learn from him, because he knew that the greatness of the sport, or for us, the greatness of the industry, is not in the object that he made, but the way people used it and the way people interacted with it in changing environments. And as a master craftsman, Pocock knew he wasn't making a thing, but he was making an entire environment, an entire experience that literally carried the spirit of the people that sat in it. And if he did that successfully, he could build something that could actually lift them and propel them on top of the surfaces that they used. And so I'd like to propose something. I'd like to propose that design is in fact a great art. It is a symphony of motion made up of thousands of moving pieces. And the fact that people can hold and touch and interact with the things we make in all of their technical and behavioral complexity, and at the same time experience a powerful connection with environments, with communities, and with people around them, absolutely blows my mind. Like, I don't know how we make that happen, but somehow we do. And I think we really need to take ownership in the part that we play. And so like him, we have to remember that the products we make are entire environments that hold great possibility. And ultimately, it is the people using those environments that make it work. And so we actually need to equip them with the proper tools to show up and execute gracefully and intentionally. Thank you so much.